Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're heading into the world of UFOs.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, it's specifically UFO sightings that people have reported seeing from space.
Oh, wow, from space.
Yeah, so we'll be checking out a YouTube video by Tyler Glockner from Secure Team 10.
Okay.
He's pretty well known in the UFO community. Always gets people talking with his videos.
Right. Yeah, I've seen a few of those.
So basically, our mission today is to go through some of his most intriguing cases and, try and figure out why these sightings are just so captivating to people.
That's a great point. UFOs kind of tap into this primal curiosity we all have,
Yeah.
about the unknown. Like, are we really alone in all this vastness of space?
For sure. And Tyler really kicks things off with this footage from the ISS, the International Space Station.
Oh, wow.
And he focuses on this clip where an astronaut seems to put his hand right in front of the camera,
Oh, wow.
just as a UFO zips by.
Mm.
Tyler actually points out the audio too, suggests that it was on purpose. Like the astronaut's trying to hide the UFO.
Haha, that's that classic UFO thing, isn't it? They're covering it up narrative. I mean, it does play into, our natural suspicion of authority.
Totally.
Especially when you're dealing with something as groundbreaking as, alien life, potentially.
It's like a scene straight out of a movie, right?
Usually.
It's like, but even if he's just adjusting his visor, that hand movement is a little sus.
Yeah, I get that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why not just release a statement? Clear it up.
Yeah, why so secretive?
If it's so innocent.
Well, think about it, though. NASA's main focus is on, scientific research and, mission safety, right? So their cameras they're often focused on specific experiments or collecting data.
Right.
So a sudden pan away could just be, them shifting priorities or even a technical adjustment. It doesn't necessarily mean cover up, but I get why people jump to that conclusion.
Right. Okay, I see your point. But even if it's not some big conspiracy, there's still something about that footage that just makes you wonder.
Right? Absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of this topic, right? It gets our imaginations going.
Totally.
And forces us to, confront the limits of what we actually know.
Yeah.
And Tyler doesn't stop there. He goes on to look at another object in the ISS footage, one that he describes as a boomerang-shaped UFO. And he even links it back to, similar sightings during the Apollo missions back in the 60s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he gets super hyped about this, comparing the recent footage to the Apollo missions and suggesting this ongoing pattern of alien activity out there.
Yeah, it's tempting to connect the dots, right, and see a pattern.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about, potentially alien spacecraft.
For sure.
But let's step back for a second and think about this from a scientific point of view.
Okay.
Even here on Earth, we've got objects that look kind of similar at first glance.
Right.
But have totally different, origins and function. Think of a Frisbee and a satellite dish. Both roundish shapes, but their purposes are completely different.
That's a great analogy. So you're saying just because two things look alike doesn't mean they're related.
Exactly. We need to look beyond just visuals, consider other things.
Yeah.
Like how the object moves, how it behaves.
Okay.
For instance, the way something appears to move can actually be affected by something called parallax error.
Parallax error.
Yeah, it's like an optical illusion where objects closer to the camera seem to move faster against the background.
Oh.
Even if they're traveling at the same speed.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
So Tyler's take on that boomerang UFO might not be the whole picture.
Right.
What we're seeing could be influenced by, our perspective, the camera angle, even this parallax error.
Exactly. When you're looking at footage from space, you got to remember we're seeing a 3D environment.
Right.
But from a 2D perspective,
okay, yeah.
Things can look totally different depending on where the camera is and how the object's moving,
That's crazy.
Relative to the background.
Okay, so Tyler doesn't just stop at the boomerang. He goes on to claim that there's this highway of activity in space.
A highway.
Yeah, and he points to footage from all these different missions like STS-114, STS-123.
Wow.
And those Apollo missions we talked about earlier.
Okay, the highway of activity. That's a bold statement.
Yeah.
But remember how things move in space can be super deceiving when you're looking from Earth?
Okay.
Our brains are wired to look for patterns even when they're not there.
Right.
We see a few dots moving in a weird way and we want to connect them, create a story about alien spaceships zipping through the cosmos. But what if those dots are just space debris tumbling in their own orbits? That's where critical thinking comes in.
So he shows all these snippets of UFOs making turns, changing direction, behaving in ways that he says no known space object would.
Visually, it's very compelling. I'll give him that.
Right.
But our understanding of space is still like a work in progress. And we got to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
Yeah.
Like take camera frame rate, for example. Imagine flipping through a flip book.
Right.
If there aren't enough pages, the motion looks all jerky, right?
Yeah.
A smooth turn can look like a sudden, impossible shift in direction.
Oh, I see.
Same thing with low frame rate video footage. It can mess with how we see movement.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's not just about what you see.
Right.
In the footage, there's all this technical stuff to think about and how our brains are interpreting it all.
Exactly.
I see.
And that brings us to what Tyler calls his smoking gun evidence.
So here we go.
He points to that astronaut's hand, blocking the camera and those sudden pans away as proof that NASA's actively censoring UFO footage.
Yeah, he even plays this clip where he straight up accuses NASA of hiding evidence of alien life.
Oh, wow.
It's actually a pretty convincing argument when you see it presented that way.
It definitely plays on that deep-seated fear we have, of being kept in the dark about the unknown, The whole government cover-up thing really fuels that UFO intrigue.
Okay, so let's unpack this smoking gun theory. What are some other explanations for those camera movements? It's hard to imagine NASA, a publicly funded organization, actively hiding evidence of aliens.
Yeah, well, remember, their main goals are scientific research and mission safety.
Right.
Their cameras are often controlled remotely from Earth.
Yeah.
So a sudden pan away could just be a technical glitch or a change in what the mission needs to focus on.
Also, the camera operators might not even be aware of the UFOs in the frame.
Right.
It's a big leap to say they're intentionally hiding something.
Exactly. You got to consider the sheer size of space and the limits of our technology.
Yeah.
It's not easy to track every little thing that pops up in the camera's view.
Right.
Especially when you're focused on a specific experiment or task.
Yeah.
Just because the camera moves away from a potential UFO doesn't mean there's some conspiracy going on. Could just be a normal adjustment, or them reacting to something more important happening on the mission.
This is getting really interesting. It seems like Tyler's interpretation might not be as straightforward as he makes it seem.
Yeah.
There are other possible explanations for those camera movements.
Yeah.
And we need to consider all sides of the story.
Analyzing UFO footage is complex.
Yeah.
You got to think about scientific principles, the limits of our tech, and even how our own brains can trick us.
Yeah.
It's about asking the right questions and staying open to different possibilities without jumping to conclusions.
All right, we've covered a lot here. We talked about Tyler's highway of activity, his analysis of that boomerang-shaped UFO, and his smoking gun theory about NASA covering things up.
Right.
Before we jump into the next layer of Tyler's claims, let's take a quick pause.
Okay.
And give you a moment to process everything we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back and ready to go even deeper with Tyler's analysis. Even if some of these sightings have more like down-to-earth explanations, there's still a part of me that wants to believe we're not alone. Is that just wishful thinking? Or is there something about the possibility of alien life that's just inherently captivating?
It's definitely more than just wishful thinking. I think throughout history, humans have always been fascinated by the unknown.
Yeah.
We look up at the stars and wonder what or who could be out there.
Right.
It's that drive to explore, to push the boundaries of what we know.
Totally.
That's led to so many scientific discoveries.
That's so true. So let's get back to Tyler's claims. He presented this idea of a highway of activity in space, showing UFOs making these crazy maneuvers.
Yeah.
Like sudden turns and like super fast changes in speed.
Right.
Is there any chance that what he's seeing could be something genuinely unexplained? Or do these movements have more conventional explanations?
It's important to remember that space is a completely different environment than what we experience here on Earth.
Right.
The laws of physics still apply, of course, but they can manifest in ways that seem strange to us. What might look like a sharp turn could actually be an object entering or exiting Earth's gravitational pull.
Oh.
Or even interacting with the gravitational fields of other planets or stars.
Wow. So even seemingly simple movements can be super complex when you factor in all those forces in space.
Yeah.
Okay. But what about those clips where Tyler shows UFOs moving way faster than any known spacecraft?
Yeah.
Could that be evidence of advanced alien tech?
Speed is a tricky thing to judge in space, especially when you're observing from so far away.
Okay.
Remember that parallax error we talked about? That can apply to speed, too. An object closer to the camera might seem like it's moving much faster than one farther away,
Oh,
even if they're both traveling at the same speed.
right.
Plus, we got to consider the limitations of the cameras themselves.
You mentioned frame rate earlier and how it can distort our perception of movement.
Yeah.
Are there other limitations of camera tech that might be influencing what we're seeing in these UFO videos?
Absolutely. Resolution is a big one. A low-resolution camera might struggle to capture the details of a far-off object,
Right.
making it look blurry or distorted.
Yeah.
This can lead to misinterpretations, especially if the object's moving fast.
Right.
Think about trying to identify a bird flying overhead on a foggy day. It's much harder to see its shape and how it's moving compared to a clear day.
That makes sense. So the quality of the footage itself can play a big role in how we perceive these UFOs and their movements. Are there any other factors we should consider when evaluating this kind of evidence?
For sure. We also have to think about the environment where the footage was taken.
Okay.
Space is full of charged particles, radiation, micrometeoroids, all that stuff.
Right.
Those things can interfere with camera sensors and create these visual artifacts that people might mistake for UFOs.
So it sounds like there are a lot of potential pitfalls when it comes to interpreting UFO footage.
Definitely.
Even experienced researchers could be misled by these visual tricks and tech limitations.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to approach these sightings with a healthy dose of skepticism
Right.
and a willingness to consider all the possible explanations.
Right.
It's easy to jump to the conclusion that anything we don't immediately understand must be alien tech,
Yeah.
but the reality is usually a lot more complicated than that.
That brings us back to Tyler's smoking gun evidence that astronaut seemingly blocking the camera and those sudden pans away from UFOs.
Right.
He uses this to argue that NASA's intentionally censoring evidence of extraterrestrial life. But you've presented some other explanations for those camera movements.
Yeah.
Could you expand on those a bit more?
Of course. So let's start with the astronaut's hand movement. Imagine you're an astronaut on a spacewalk. You're outside the space station, exposed to extreme temperatures, sunlight, the vacuum of space. You're wearing these big, bulky gloves and constantly adjusting your equipment, trying to stay balanced in microgravity.
Yeah, it's pretty wild out there.
Right. It's not crazy to think an astronaut might instinctively raise a hand to shield their eyes from a sudden burst of light or to adjust their helmet visor. It's not necessarily intentional.
So that hand movement could be a totally unintentional reflex,
Yeah.
not a deliberate attempt to hide a UFO.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget how challenging being in space must be.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about those sudden camera pans. Remember, these cameras are often operated remotely from Earth
Right.
with a significant time delay.
Okay.
The operators might not even see the potential UFO in the frame until after the camera's already moved on to something else.
So it's not necessarily a cover-up, just a matter of timing and the limitations of long-distance communication?
Exactly.
Seems like Tyler might be reading too much into it,
Yeah,
assigning intention, where there might just be coincidence or technical limitations.
it happens.
But even if these specific examples have more earthly explanations, is there a chance that some governments or agencies are actually hiding evidence of alien contact?
It's a question that's been around for decades. It's hard to say for sure, but I think it's important to remember that the scientific community thrives on transparency and sharing knowledge.
So if there were solid proof of alien life, scientists would probably want to share it with the world.
Most likely, yeah. The discovery of extraterrestrial life would be one of the biggest scientific breakthroughs in history.
Yeah, for sure.
It would totally change how we understand the universe and our place in it.
Right.
It's hard to imagine that kind of discovery being kept under wraps for very long.
Okay, that makes sense. So maybe it's not about government conspiracies, but more about the challenges of space exploration,
Right.
the limitations of our technology and our human tendency to find patterns and meaning even when things are unclear.
Exactly. And that leads us to a really interesting question. Why are we so drawn to the idea of UFOs and aliens in the first place?
Oh, that's a good one.
What is it about this topic that captures our imagination and makes us so curious?
That's a great point. We've talked a lot about the evidence or lack thereof, but what about the human side of all this?
Right.
What drives our fascination with the unknown?
That's a question that's puzzled people for ages.
Yeah.
Some might say it's a natural part of being curious, our innate desire to understand everything around us.
Right.
Others might suggest it reflects our hopes and fears, our longing for connection, and our anxieties about what's out there beyond what we can grasp.
I love that. It's like UFOs are a mirror reflecting our own desires and anxieties about the universe and our place in it.
Exactly.
It's so much more than just spaceships and aliens.
Right.
It's about grappling with these fundamental mysteries of existence.
You nailed it. I think that's what makes this topic so endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a journey into the unknown, both out there in the vastness of space and within ourselves.
That's a great place to pause for this part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We've explored how complex it is to analyze UFO footage.
Right.
The scientific explanations behind some of Tyler's claims, and that human fascination with the unknown. When we come back, we'll wrap things up by talking about how to approach this topic with both an open mind and a critical eye. So stay tuned. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into UFO sightings from space. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has. We started with Tyler's claims and ended up exploring the whole nature of scientific inquiry and our human desire to learn.
Exactly. And I think that leads us to a really important question. How do we approach this whole UFO and alien thing in a way that's both open-minded but also grounded in reason?
It's a tough balance.
Yeah. It's like we're walking this tightrope between wanting to believe and needing solid evidence.
Imagine you're walking through a forest and you see something moving in the shadows.
Ooh, spooky.
Your heart starts racing. Could it be some mythical creature, something straight out of a legend?
Right.
But then as you get closer, you realize it's just a deer blending in with the trees. You might be a little disappointed, but there's also a sense of relief, like the world makes sense again.
I get that. So you're saying that even if it's not aliens, there's still something valuable in that initial excitement of the unknown.
For sure. That sense of wonder, that drive to explore and figure things out, that's what drives scientific discovery.
Right.
Every time we debunk a UFO sighting, we actually learn something new.
Oh, okay.
We refine our understanding of the universe, how our senses can be tricked, the limits of our technology.
So it's less about proving or disproving aliens and more about embracing that process of questioning and exploring.
Exactly. Think about those early astronomers who saw weird lights in the sky and thought they were gods or celestial beings.
Right.
But over time, through observation and analysis, those lights turned out to be planets and comets, which expanded our knowledge of space.
It's a good reminder that what we think is unexplained today might be common knowledge tomorrow.
Totally. And that's why it's so important to approach UFO sightings with a good amount of skepticism.
Okay.
Not to shut down the conversation, but as a way to focus our thinking, ask the right questions, and separate real anomalies from misinterpretations or hoaxes.
So how can we as individuals find that balance between being skeptical and open-minded when we come across these claims? Is there some kind of mental checklist we can use to evaluate UFO sightings and the evidence?
I think there are a few key things to remember. First, think about the source. Who's making the claim and what's their motivation?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Are they presenting evidence-based arguments or just relying on sensationalism and speculation?
Right. We've seen how easy it is to misinterpret footage.
Yeah.
So it's important to look beyond the initial presentation and consider if the source is credible and if they might be biased. What else should we be aware of?
Look for evidence that backs up the claim. Is there more than one witness or multiple pieces of data that support it?
Right.
Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. A single blurry photo or video isn't usually enough to convince scientists.
Right. One piece of data doesn't tell the whole story.
Exactly. It's about looking for patterns, multiple sources pointing to the same conclusion. What about the evidence itself? What are some red flags?
Okay.
Be careful of descriptions that are vague or unclear. If someone can't describe a UFO in detail, like its shape, size, or how it moved, it might mean they're filling in the gaps with their imagination or what they already believe.
So being specific is key.
Right. If someone says they saw a UFO, they should be able to give details about how it looked, how it moved, and the environment.
Makes sense.
And lastly, don't be afraid to question the experts. Just because someone has a scientific background or a platform doesn't mean they're always right.
That's a good point.
Be critical of their methods, their analysis, and their conclusions.
It's about being an active part of the process of discovery, not just passively accepting information.
You got it. And remember, it's okay to not have all the answers. The universe is vast and complex and full of mysteries. Embracing that uncertainty, that sense of wonder, is part of what makes exploring it so cool.
That's a really great way to wrap up our deep dive.
It has been fun.
We started with Tyler's claims and ended up talking about scientific inquiry and the human desire for knowledge.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll find definitive proof of alien life.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Until then, keep an open mind, be skeptical, and never lose that sense of wonder.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into UFOs and the mysteries of space.
It was my pleasure.
Keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the universe and all its wonders.